George Orwell's 1984. This is actually the first time I read this book, and that's because I grew up in communist Romania, and I always believed that since I lived 1984, there's no point in reading it. But I finally got around and read it, and it was definitely worth it. So I'm not going to do any in-depth analysis of this book. Obviously, there have been many interpretations. I mean, not interpretations, but many types of analysis. I just want to say a few words about this book as read by somebody who experienced communism. And that's because I lived for 30 years in the United States. And during my life there, I heard many times references to this book. But since I didn't actually go, I mean, I went to university in the United States, but I didn't study English. So I'm not sure how this book is taught in schools. But I know from my intellectual American friends that when they often talk about this book, they talk about it as if it were a book about some kind of society that never existed, and Orwell is some kind of dystopian society that Orwell imagined, but that society never existed. But it could happen any time in America. So many of them talk about it as some kind of a dystopian society that would be incarnated in some kind of dystopian capitalist America. And in fact, the words Big Brother, which I often heard, but I never knew that they actually come from Orwell. When I heard them in America, I heard them always as synonym for, Big Brother being capitalist America, or some kind of a synonym for a nefarious CIA or something like that. So this being said, I need to say that this is very, for somebody who experienced communism, it's very obvious that this book was modeled on communism. He wrote it in 1948. By that time, Soviet Union already existed. Communist Romania was just starting. Um, Let me just give you a few examples so you understand why this is obviously modeled on communism. So this is a society, obviously, a dictatorship, totalitarian society in which, aside from the fact that people are not free, they are under constant supervision from someone they called Big Brother. Now, who knows everything about them and whatever they do. Now, and this Big Brother is some kind of a leader that people haven't actually seen. They don't even know if he's real, but he's everywhere. His photos are everywhere. Well, Big Brother is clearly modeled on Stalin. And in communism, all the leaders in all the communist countries, their photos were everywhere. You have the posters. If you went into a classroom, in our classrooms, the portrait of the president of the country, who was also the general secretary of the Communist Party, was there was a huge portrait of his in the classroom. In any public office, you had his portrait. You have to know that in communism there was no private offices, so everything was public. The books they had, the manuals had the portrait of the dear leader. This is how he was called. So that's as far as Big Brother is concerned. Then people called each other comrade. The words ladies and gentlemen were banished. Okay, this is how, in this book, people call each other comrade. Now, I don't think in capitalism people call each other comrade. Then this is a society of scarcity, just like in communism. I mean, capitalism, if with all its problems, if there's something good about it, is that people have everything. I mean, in fact, they have too much. So here in this society, food is rationed, just like in communism, we had coupons to get our food. Chocolate and coffee are not really the real thing. You have some kind of ersatz products that replace chocolate and coffee, same like in the society in which I grew up. And then the organization of the society is you have a hierarchy. So first, on the top of the food chain, there is Big Brother, and then there's the inner party. Oh, I forgot to say the most important thing. There is only one party, and that is called the party with a capital. Okay. That was exactly like in communism. Okay. In capitalist America, you have two parties, and in most other countries, you have many parties. Well, communism is the one society in which you have one structure, which is called the party. And in fact, in living in America, I realized that most intellectuals don't even know that. Because when I wrote my books and I was talking about the party, they wanted me to mention what kind of party. Well, in communism, there is only one party, okay, which is called the party. So you have the inner party in 1984. You have the inner party, which represents about 2% of the population, I think, if I remember correctly. Yes, which is exactly like in communism, like in the society in which I grew up. Now, in communism, in the real communism, not in this book, the equivalent of the inner party was called the Comintern. That was like the people with the highest positions in the hierarchy of the party. They even had their own stores. The rest of the population was starving. They had their own stores. Okay. So these are the people who have all the power. Then there is the outer party here. Okay. In real communism, the outer party was just simply the regular members of the Communist Party. So these people had some benefits and advantages. They could get promotions, for example, but other than that, they didn't have that much. And then there is what Orwell calls the masses or the proles, short for proletarians, which is the majority of the population. And these people are starving and they are under constant surveillance. That's exactly like the country in which I grew up. It's exactly the same. Now, of course, it's still literature and it's great literature. So obviously there is some ambiguity. So you can apply this. There are things that obviously are imagined. There is a love story and which ends really badly. And I'm just going to say a few words about the the ending of the book. It becomes really difficult to read the ending because at the ending, there is description of torture. It's really well written, but as I say, difficult to read. And what Orwell really gets, it's absolute evil. Because what is absolute evil, and that's communism, is when people not only are they tortured physically and morally to the point that the pain becomes unbearable, but they are not even allowed to stay to be only victims. They are transformed themselves into torturers and tormentors themselves. That's absolute evil. Okay. So I'm not going to give away the entire ending, but the ending in the end, Orwell brings the circle to a close. That's totalitarianism means a circle in which there's no more distinction between perpetrators and those who are subjected to the who are victimized. So in the end, the victim himself is forced to adopt the mindset of the tormentor. So everybody is the same in the end. Well, that's totalitarianism. That was communism. I can give a very in short a description of a horrible experiment in communist Romania, which goes even further than what Orwell imagined, in which there was a prison called in a town called Pitești. It's called the Pitești experiment, in which 1,000 students were subjected to the worst experiment possible. Not only were they tortured in a horrific way, they were forced to imagine sexual acts with their mothers, and for example, they were forced to eat excrements. And after being tortured horrifically, they were forced to torture their own friends. That's evil. Okay. So they were not even allowed to stay victims. That's that's pushing the limits of evil. So in reality, communism went even further than Orwell imagined, but he came really close to imagining the most horrific of societies that can exist. And so read 1984 if you haven't read it yet. It's really not only a visionary work, but it's very well written. It's truly a masterpiece.